Hi, this is Ed Feingold, and this is another Billing Views whiteboard movie. And I want to talk about why billing is getting interesting again. And one of the reasons is because the way we think of subscribers is really changing, because of the way the market's changing. So, especially in the cable world, a billing system used to think of a subscriber as a household. And what the provider was concerned about in this case was their TV, and then obviously years later, their internet, and their phone. But that was all pretty much tied to things like street address, or a phone number, especially in the telco world, and the account owner's name. But those things are becoming a little bit less important because of what's happening with direct-to-consumer services, especially digital content. And now what's important is getting to the individuals in this household. So one of the reasons that that's becoming more important is not just because you can increase revenue, obviously, by catering to each of these individuals and selling them more stuff, but because one of the other things that's changing is that, if you think about it, most operators, right, were regional. And so if you were an MSO or a telco or any pay TV provider, basically other than the satellite guys who are national, you're selling into this territory, right, and all the homes that are in this territory. But now what we're seeing are guys like Verizon, right? Verizon's coming in, and they're saying, well, yeah, sure, we'll sell here with Fios, which they started doing, their fiber to the home service, their pay TV service. But pretty quickly now they've changed direction and said, wait a minute, just because our physical network isn't somewhere doesn't mean that we can't reach somebody. So what you start having happen is, instead of just this direct competition between these guys in a specific territory, no, well, let's go outside that territory, right? And neither of these guys have network in this territory. This is, some other MSO who's here, and that MSO is similarly serving households, right? Selling into this household the same kinds of services, but they're facing the same thing, right? Individuals in the house. And Verizon is saying, I'm not going to worry too much about whether this guy's my subscriber or not. I'm going to come in. You're using something that is basically an over-the-top model and sell directly to those consumers. These consumers may stay subscriber for this guy, for their fixed services, and they may even buy over-the-top like services from that guy, but they can also buy them from anybody else that's coming into that market and selling it to them. So what this means for billing systems is that you really need to get away from this concept of street address. Like, if you need a street address to bill somebody, then you're missing out on how people are selling. I mean, a lot of these other services, like Apple, doesn't necessarily need a street address to be able to sell you anything onto your iPhone. So that's one of the ways that's going to change billing systems a lot. So let's talk for a second about essentially what that's doing. Well, what are the risks? Part of the problem here is that we've got, let's say hundreds of millions or billions of dollars invested in billing infrastructure. And it's complex, right? So you have this big honking billing infrastructure, right, that's got all kinds of hooks into it from other systems, right? So I like to call these things Whopper, like war games from the 80s, right? This is our biller. And this biller has all kinds of hooks coming in and out of it that go to other systems, right? And those other systems are things like product catalogs and invoicing and customer service and all these other processes that one way or another tie in or out of billing. And this biller, again, likes to think about things like households, right? So how's it going to accommodate for selling personalized services to individuals, doing that on demand? Well, what we're starting to see is this idea of like, okay, well, what we're going to need to build next to this is a separate silo, right? That's kind of shiny and new. And what we're going to let this thing do is all the fancy stuff that you need. So this sucker's going to do stuff like charging. You know, payments on the individual basis, or reaching out to the payments cloud like credit cards. May even be handling things like, basically, this will handle a direct-to-bill charge. Not necessarily to a third party, although it can do that as well. But basically being able to transact with the individual, right? Transact with an individual, which is what this guy likes to do, right? And then push that over here into the postpaid billing environment. So you're running these two things side by side. Now, sometimes what we're seeing is to get this up and running, is that this isn't really a separate silo that's being built. This sucker is cloud billing. This is being run out of the cloud, right? And over time, what they want to do is they want to scale this thing up. When it reaches a certain amount of scale and says, hey, the businesses that this thing are running are becoming our mainline business, now what do we do? You know, so do we crack this guy open and merge this over? Maybe, and maybe all along the way, when you stand this up, you're going through a transformation program in the background to make this environment more friendly to this whole transition. That certainly can be happening. You may take this thing that's in a public cloud and move it into a private cloud and keep it running as an adjunct, right? Or, again, you may have this whole transition plan that says, no, you know, ultimately what our architecture is going to look like is something like this, where internally we are one big private billing cloud. And all those hooks that we were seeing before basically still exist, but now we want to do that as sort of better defined APIs. That make the inner workings of this thing a little more opaque to anything that's happening outside of it. And make it so that basically we're pulling data or functionality in and out of this big honking converged cloud. And this converged cloud is able to do any kind of service, real-time billing, charging. And so this is why this is all getting interesting, because when you start envisioning a future like this, it starts calling into questions all kinds of things. Like, do policy and charging belong in the same place? Should all billing be real-time? Should all billing be some form of cloud? Where should a product catalog live in all of this? Is that inside this billing cloud? Is it external to it? How do you want to handle that? So there's all these new questions that are popping up. As you have this reflection of what's happening in the marketplace, really opening new doors to questions about architecture, and then obviously technology changing that, just because we're seeing things like you know, cloud-based systems that can be much more scalable than we thought of before, and having these hybrid cloud environments where really important stuff lives inside in the, you know, in the on-site environment or inside a secure private cloud, and some stuff lives out in the public cloud. So this is part of the reason I think billing is becoming interesting again, because we have all these new questions to answer. And at the end of the day, what it all talks to is how are we generating new kinds of revenue, creating new kinds of experiences, and interacting with individuals in ways that operators really never have in the past, and that billing systems certainly weren't designed to account for in the past. And that's it.